my name is Chad Lee. I'm an attorney in Glenwood Springs. I practice at the firm of Balcomb and Green. And today I'll be talking about the benefits of business entities. First, why would someone want to form a business entity? Well, there are a number of reasons. First and foremost, personal asset liability protection. This is the biggest reason for forming an entity, and I'll spend the most time on it today. Second, financial flexibility. It's a lot easier to raise capital when you have a business in place, as opposed to doing it yourself. Third, there are different tax consequences to different types of entities. I will briefly summarize those today and send you to an accountant to get more information. And finally, there's a bunch of credibility that goes along with forming a business entity. If you can go to someone, potential investor, and say, my company blank LLC, you have a lot more credibility than someone who goes up by themselves. First, I'll discuss liability. Liability is the first and foremost purpose for forming a business entity, properly forming a business entity. As we'll see later, there are differences between the business entities with respect to liability. You may be wondering, what is liability? Well, liability comes in many forms, and there are two major forms. One is contractual, and the second is tort liability. Contractual is just what it sounds like. You or your company enters into a contract and agrees to do something. There are penalties for failing to perform under that contract. If you breach the contract, a court could award judgment against you or your company. That is contractual liability. If you've properly formed an LLC or corporation, the liability attaches to the business entity itself and not necessarily your personal assets. In terms of tort liability, a tort is a way to describe a wrong that a court has recognized that you have perpetrated upon another person or entity. Examples of torts are assault or false imprisonment. Now, those are intentional torts. Of course, we recognize those as wrongs. There are also unintentional torts. For example, negligence. And this is where a lot of liability stems from, especially in the corporate world. Negligence is where you fail to act as a reasonably prudent person would act in your situation, and you cause somebody else damages. Now, like I said before, where you have properly formed a business entity, such as an LLC or corporation, liability from a judgment for negligence would only attach to that business entity and not to your personal assets, such as your house, your car, and all of your personal effects. This is the primary reason for forming a business entity. Second, I'll go over a couple of various business entities. The four major ones are sole proprietorship, general partnership, corporation, and an LLC. The first two don't provide liability protection. A sole proprietorship is a single person acting on his own behalf, transacting business, operating his own affairs. He may have a business name for his business, but it's not registered, and he doesn't follow the corporate procedures or any type of business entity procedures. He's just carrying on business for himself. That is called a sole proprietorship, and no filing is necessary. The second form is a general partnership. A general partnership is defined as two persons carrying on as co-owners of a business for profit. A general partnership can be formed without filing any papers. It is the default business entity for two persons transacting business. The one big pitfall of a general partnership is that each partner is liable for the other partner's debts. And be very careful if you see yourself operating a business with a partner, even if you're not registered. Now, all the other types of entities are registered with the Colorado Secretary of State's office. You need to file various registration statements for these entities. The two types of business entities I'll go over today that require registration and provide liability protection are a corporation and a limited liability company, or LLC. The corporation is the oldest business entity. It provides for rigid structures for transacting business, for operating your business, for having set schedule of meetings, keeping various corporate records. There are strict requirements for electing boards of directors and officers, but it also provides flexibility in the financial department. Everybody's familiar with the stock exchange and public corporations, where you can buy a certain number of shares into a corporation and watch those shares appreciate, or more recently, perhaps depreciate. If you are planning on working with venture capitalists and potentially working towards an initial public offering, which most people ideally are, a corporation is the way to go. There are two major types of corporations, an S Corp and a C Corp. And the S and the C refer to the tax code. Generally, a C Corp is a corporation that can have an unlimited number of shareholders and an unlimited number of classes of stock. And the different classes of stock include preferred stock, Class A stock, Class B stock. An S corporation is primarily a small corporation. It's limited to around 20 shareholders, depending on the state you're in. And there can only be one class of stock. The difference between the two, besides the size, is the taxation that occurs. In a C Corp, the corporation is double taxed. First, they're taxed on the profits that come in the corporation, and they're also taxed on the distributions that go to the shareholders. An S Corp is taxed like a partnership or an LLC. It's called pass-through taxation. The profits come into the corporation and they're taxed once on the way out. And that's the benefit of having an S Corp. The second form of entity is a limited liability company. The benefits of an LLC are that it's a very flexible structure. You don't necessarily have to follow the rigid structures of corporation. You can draft your own operating agreement, and that will define the duties between the various members of the LLC. There are limited requirements on the number of officers or the structure that you have to operate within, and that's the large benefit of an LLC. Most small business owners who start up their businesses in a small community such as our valley start with an LLC. Now, I should note that once you form your LLC or corporation or other type of entity with personal asset liability protection, there are ways around that liability protection. You need to be careful how you operate your business. A court can find you personally liable in certain situations, and this is referred to in the courts as piercing the corporate veil. And it doesn't just apply to corporations, it also applies to LLCs. In order to pierce the corporate veil and to find you personally liable, even though you've properly set up an LLC, there are certain things that happen in most cases. First is an element of fraud or intentional misrepresentation. It is improper conduct. If a court finds that, it may well find you personally liable. For example, if you lie on a contract, you misrepresent something, you provide a warranty that you know is untrue, and even though your name is not on the bottom line, your LLC's is, you could be personally liable for those debts. Other tips to keep the shield of personal asset liability in place. Keep your corporation or LLC in good standing with the Secretary of State. Keep proper records. Document all transactions. Do not commingle personal funds and business funds. That's a large one. And always identify the business name when you're transacting business with somebody else. Another way you could be personally liable is if you personally guarantee the contract. Now, be sure when you're signing a contract that you sign it in your capacity as your office in the LLC or the corporation, as president of blank corporation, as sole member of blank LLC. Otherwise, you could be found to be personally liable on that contract. Now, today I've gone through the basic steps on personal asset liability protection and two major entities. There are other entities, and more information can be found at the Colorado Secretary of State's website. I would encourage you to consult both an accountant and an attorney if you plan on operating business in this valley.